Welcome to the Connexus Church audio podcast. This is Carey Newhoff, and as one of the bonuses for our current series, Ad Follow Block, I thought I would bring you a conversation that I had with Henry Cloud. So if you listened in on part 3 of Ad Follow Block, where we talked about toxic people, I talked about Henry Cloud's categorization of people into 3 categories: wise, foolish, and evil. Now, we don't spend a lot of time on that in this interview, but in this wide-ranging interview, I have a fascinating conversation with Henry Cloud and thought that might be interesting to you. And of course, we have another bonus episode featuring an interview I did with John Townsend, who I quoted in part 4 of the podcast. So hope you enjoy these bonus podcasts. And as always, hope you have great small group discussion. But here is my conversation with clinical psychologist, leadership expert, and New York Times bestselling author, Henry Cloud. Well, such a thrill to have Henry Cloud on the podcast today. Henry, welcome.
Good to be here.
Yeah. Well, you work with a lot of business leaders and also a lot of pastors. I mean, so many of us have read your work. We've heard you speak at Global Leadership Summit and at all kinds of other venues. But I think you get a lot of insight into sort of the human spirit and the conditions of leaders in particular. What are some of the top issues you just keep seeing leaders struggle with today? And why are those the top issues in your view?
Oh my gosh, if we talk about top, we're going to be here a while, right?
I got time.
Well, let me preface a little bit by putting it into context, and it'll help understand why those issues arise with the leaders I work with. I'm a clinical psychologist by training.
Right.
But when I went knocking on doors in my first job, this was right out of graduate school, still in graduate school, actually. My first job was in a leadership consulting firm. And so this was before leadership coaching and executive coaches and all that stuff. But there were leaders that they were working with and developing, but they also found that, a lot of times, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, some leaders have issues, right?
I may have noticed that a little bit, yeah.
And so they wanted somebody with a clinical background, to work on the individual issues that leaders were encountering. So from day one in my work as a psychologist, I've always worked pretty much 90% in the context of leaders in their worlds, high-level leaders, CEOs and C-suite types, and both business and Christian organizations. And when I got into that, Carey, it was interesting. You have this, if you put on the left-hand side of the board leadership, and people study leadership and, vision casting and strategy and execution and all that stuff, that, which is really, really important for people to learn and develop in. What happens is they get out there into this place called reality.
Yeah, we do.
And the reality is you can get all the training and all of this stuff you can get, and you have to, right?
Yeah.
There's science to leadership. But you get out there in reality, and then you find out that our individual makeup and our individual strengths, our individual woundedness, our individual weaknesses, all of that begins to interface with how we do leadership. And so I found out early on that leadership isn't just about leadership. It's really about the person of the leader, how they're glued together, what hits their buttons, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And it's highly, highly interpersonal. Yeah. And the way that leaders have got to make things happen really has a lot to do with how they can get an army moving. And so I tend to work in that, I call it the middle space between where, leaders and their personal and interpersonal stuff comes in, together. And when you ask the question, what are the top issues? Yeah, I'd say there's 2 or 3 that I find myself seeing and working in just almost all the time. And right. If there's 10 things, there's 2 or 3 you always see. One is that I see leaders hitting a wall or hitting a ceiling or struggling when they don't recognize, and everybody does this, I'm not pointing fingers, but they don't recognize that they have built their organization and they're leading their organization or their team or whatever it is they're leading. They're leading it. They've kind of constructed it in their own image.
Yep.
And what that means is, when I think of leadership, the model that I developed and use a lot in organizations is whatever topic you're talking about leadership, it's always going to fall into, it's about these 5 buckets. I call them buckets.
Okay.
And basically, I'm a psychologist, so I look at this thing the way that really the brain is organized. If you want a good model for leadership, go to God and say, okay, if you were going to build an organization, God, what would it look like? Well, he's done that.
Yes, he has.
Yeah. So he builds this organization called the church. And he says this church has a head. And the head, this organization is a body, but the head leads this thing. And when we look at what does a head actually do? Well, God he builds heads. And when you look at how our brain is constructed and what it does, you always hear leadership being about moving something from here to there. Well, if I'm standing here and I'm standing on this side of the room and I figure, you know what, my life would be better if I stood over there. See, if my church would be better if I had a vision of it being over there where we were doing this and that and it looked like this. That's the first thing the brain does. It comes up with a really clear vision, and I like to call that a desired future state.
Sure.
And after you get that vision, then the second thing your brain does is realize I can't get there by myself. I got to engage the right talent. So the second piece is I'm going to need a couple of legs. I'm going to need an eye to focus or 2. I'm going to need an inner ear to balance me. And it makes sure, and I can't emphasize this enough, it makes sure that it has the right competencies around it apart from itself. And there's a high focus on that second bucket of engaging the right talent. Then the third piece is, how are we going to get there? So it doesn't just start walking. It says, well, I'm going to walk and I'm going to execute this plan where I'm going to take 5 steps in a certain amount of time. And we got a strategy and we got a specific plan. And then it starts to walk. And the fourth thing it does is it measures the things that are important and holds itself accountable. It starts to wander off. It goes right into adapting and fixing what's off. So if you take that path of coming up with the future, what I want it to look like, number 1. Number 2, engaging the right talent. Number 3, do I have a strategy and a plan? Number 4, am I measuring and holding people accountable to the right things? Number 5, am I fixing what I find when I hold people accountable? That's leadership. So when you get to a leader and you find them and you want to do what I do, you guys say, I got to come help you. Sometimes I go, dude, this is what leadership requires. Your organization has to have all 5 of these things all the time. Now, it just so happens that you're really good at defining the future. You're really good at thinking up, what you want this place and the mission to look like. And you're pretty good at coming up with a strategy and a plan. But let's talk about this accountability bucket.
Yeah.
That's kind of absent. And they go, I know, you start to look at accountability, and it just so happens that they're not that great at accountability. They don't like to hold people accountable. They want to go big picture and strategy and developing systems and accountability, ways that their team holds each other accountable and making an immune system throughout the organization where accountability happens before it gets to them. That's leadership. And so basically that's one. I see leaders kind of, not realizing that your organization needs what you're not good at. And so you got to make sure that all of those buckets are there and don't build it in your own image. And speaking of accountability, and I'm talking about very big ministries, very successful ones. One of the things I see in Christian organizations and even large churches that I interact with, is the church tends to get this culture that we're a ministry and we treat people well and all of this. And if you bring performance standards and accountability into the picture, you're going to have somebody somewhere. Every pastor's heard somebody say this. Well, wait, this isn't a business. This is a ministry.
Yep.
And basically what they're saying is, you start holding people accountable, and having performance standards, then that's not how we treat people around here, because we're a ministry. And, you go to the New Testament and it is a performance standard, just manual. I mean, there's pruning that happens when people aren't fruitful. There's necessary endings that occur when, somebody's got to be pruned. And Paul says, reject a divisive person after a second warning. There's all of this, where the parable of the talents, where you invest something, you demand a return. And so one of the things I find with ministry leaders is getting them to realize that requiring performance out of every position is a stewardship issue, and letting this stuff and people just kind of not perform is not good for them. It's not good for the organization. It's not good stewardship, and you're not going to reach your vision.
See, that's fascinating, because, any podcast listener who listens to more than a few episodes, or people who read my writings, whether that's blog or books, I hear what you just said as pushback every week from people who are like, the church is not a business. You can't do that. And they do just the opposite. They go to the Bible, because I don't think we're very good at accountability in the church. And they say, look at Jesus. He spent time with everybody. He hung out with everybody. It's all love. It's all good. What do you say to that? Yeah.
Whoa. You just changed buckets on me.
Okay.
Remember, I said the second bucket was engaging the talent.
Right.
And so staying connected to people, fueling them, developing them. He said, make disciples. These are, you're forming people. But that doesn't mean we sit around in a hot tub and just eat crackers and sing. Yeah. Very, 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 very big part of formation of people is this accountability, performance standards. To want somebody to get better. Even on the people front, if you go to, if you go to 2 Peter 1, for example, it's talking about developing leaders to be fruitful. It says, if these qualities are present in you and increasing over time, you'll be productive and you won't be fruitless. And the only way to get to where you're going is requiring increase, requiring for people to improve, requiring for them to perform, requiring for them to get better. That's has nothing to do with Jesus spending time with people. Every time he spent time with people, he was pushing them to get better. What are they talking about?
Why do you think we struggle with this so much in the church? Because I agree, accountability can be a big issue, that whole development, side that, there's a lot of people who would suggest just be faithful, don't worry about the fruit. I've heard that argument before.
You really have heard that fruit?
I can take you to comments on my blog. I can take you to my inbox. I've heard people say that. They say it's a business model that gets superimposed on the church.
Well, they need to read their Bibles. I'm sorry. I'm serious.
I love it.
This just drives me crazy. I remember one time, look, I'll give you a great example of this. Large Christian organization. And I was working with this particular part of it. And this one guy said to me, he said, well, I just need a more grace-oriented leader. My leader's too legalistic.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's terrible. You don't want a legalist as a leader. He says, yeah, you guys just, what he does is he wants me to, every week, he wants me to turn in how many evangelistic contacts I had the week before. And he's got a certain number he wants me to have every week. He said, I just can't work under that kind of legalism. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Did he tell you that you were going to go to hell if you didn't get these evangelistic numbers done? And he said, well, no, he didn't tell me I'd go to hell. He's just requiring all these numbers and stuff. I said, well, legalism is if he told you your standing in God depends on how many you do. I said, this other thing you're talking about where he requires you to hit some number, that's called a job. That's not legalism. That's, are you kidding me? And I mean, you can't read the New Testament. You cannot read the New Testament without this seeing that God, I talk a lot about a leader's wake.
Okay.
Because I'm a boater. And I think
right, me too.
When a boat goes across a lake, it leaves a wake behind it. Or across the ocean, it leaves a wake behind it. You can tell a lot about that boat by looking at the wake. Is it straight? Is it headed towards one heading? Or is it curving all over the place? Is it too deep or too shallow? You look at the wake, you can tell a lot about the boat. Well, a leader, you can tell a lot about a leader by their wake. And this is always, you tell your leaders, look, I know you got your own ways of thinking how you're evaluated, but this is reality. You're getting evaluated on two things. The wake. The two sides of the wake are this. Number one is results, and I don't mean in priority, but results and the relationships.
Yep.
If you have strong relationships, but you guys aren't getting anywhere, those relationships are going to go south. And it's not going to be a good culture. It's not growing. There's not life there. But if you have strong results and you're killing everybody in the process, the result side of the wake is strong, but the relationship and the culture is not strong, that's going to kill those results eventually, and people don't want to be there. And the Bible always, and I think of this in terms of you'll always, whenever you read the scriptures, you're going to see two parallel tracks. And there's a lot of different words for this, but it has to do with who God is. God has a relational track. You hear like the two tracks, grace and truth, for example, mercy and righteousness, compassionate and holiness. And these two tracks of, you've got God's grace and you also have his truth, that he's loving and relationally, but there are expectations and there's structure and there's standards to how we build and how we love and how we work. And so if anybody thinks they can bail out on one of those tracks, then they're not reading the Bible, and they're not also, they're not really studying business. See, that's what's interesting to me, Carey. The biggest percentage of my work, probably 80 to 90%, is with businesses and companies. And this, you ask about the big issues, and one of the other issues I see is that sometimes ministry leaders don't recognize that secular companies do a lot more in focusing on developing their leaders. Mm-hmm. And Christian ministries, a lot of times, not all Christian ministries, but some and many, they want their leaders to just serve others. They're supposed to be output all the time. And you're not going to get the ability to hold people to really great results if you're also not pouring into them and developing them.
I think that's a really good insight. There's so much already. Why do you think that is? I think, just a quick editorial on what you've said so far, I think results in relationship, what I tend to see is the polarization of that thinking in the church, where people are all relationship or all results, and it creates a reaction in the other direction. But I think you're right about both of them. Why do you think churches are hesitant to develop their leaders? I mean, you're a frequent speaker at the Global Leadership Summit, which I'm sure almost everyone's familiar with, if not have been there at one point or another. But that's probably not enough, is it? Just to, spend 2 days in Chicago or at a satellite site. Why do you think churches are reluctant to develop leaders and people properly?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think, we also forget that, when you make the difference between the business and the ministry. In the business world, you don't have some of the the Christian stuff that infiltrates the culture and the thinking. And I say Christian in
Sure.
in quotations.
Okay.
I don't mean biblical. I mean some of the things, some of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. For example, Jesus referred to it as it's the traditions of the elders, not the oracles of God.
Right.
And some of that thinking gets in there. And one of those ways of thinking that gets into this is there's a lot of Christians that think that everything is about, it's dying to self, it's serving, it's giving, all of the things that we're making sacrifices, right? We're giving.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about us. And so what they'll do is that thinking gets into the way that they lead, and they'll have a little reluctance to take some big part of the budget. I don't mean big in terms of over 50%, but I mean a significant part of their budget, and spend it on, and budget, I mean time and energy and money, but spend it on developing their leaders, because sometimes it thinks, well, that's money that's going away from the ministry.
Right.
Or that's time developing us, that's when we're not serving. And it's sort of like I'm supposed to be, volunteering all around the clock. And if I go work on myself, I'm being selfish. And that kind of thinking gets in there to where they don't realize that the only way that you are going to get, better, and you're going to grow and you're going to be fruitful if you're tending the vine, if you're tending the garden. And so sometimes I think some people are reluctant to focus on leadership because it takes, quote, time away from the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not time away from the ministry. It's one of the most important things that leaders do is develop their army and build in competencies and all of that. And I think that's part of it. And also, Carey, I think part of it is, pastors and Christian leaders and business leaders as well, they get good at something. Maybe it's evangelism.
Right.
Maybe it's music. Maybe it's finance. Maybe it's outreach. Maybe it's children's ministry. Maybe it's youth ministry. They get good at something. When you're good at something, then what happens is they ask you to start, doing more, and then you do more. And now they charge. Well, you were trained and developed for what you're good at. You're trained and developed to do evangelism or youth ministry or preach or whatever. But now you find yourself with two jobs. You're also a leader. And people don't treat leadership sometimes, realizing that their leadership is what is going to make their youth ministry work or not work.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that takes as much training and development as this other thing you do really well. And I just add one more thing, that a lot of times they've grown up in systems that didn't do it. So they don't really have a model for it. They don't really know, what should I be doing with my leaders? What am I supposed to develop them on? And the content world of what they've got to be focusing on sometimes really isn't in their repertoire.
Now, I think I couldn't agree more. I think you're totally right. Is there a number? Like, let's just talk about budget, for example. And I know this comes up around a lot of boardrooms at church world, and they're like, how much for this retreat, or what is registration, or can we really afford to rent a bus, fly people down?
Right.
This is so if you were just like broad strokes on a budget, just as a percentage, so it kind of works. And knowing that small churches, it's going to be a greater sacrifice than if you're a $10 million or $2 million church. But like, I know companies often will spend 10% on R&D What is there a benchmark that you're like, yeah, you should be at least looking at this?
I I probably wouldn't be the person to ask about a church budget, but I would say it this way, that I would look at the place where they get into trouble.
Yeah.
Is they do exactly what you just said. Well, how much is this conference, or how much is this, send them on this retreat? Don't do it that way. Go back to the beginning and say, okay, here's our church budget, right? Here's what, call it $1 million, 5 million, 10 million, 150 million, whatever it is. Now, what are we going to set aside as a line item for leadership development? And you come up with that. You come up with that number. Then it's a separate meeting to sit down and say, how are we going to spend that number? That way, when that retreat brochure comes in, you're going, okay, well, let's say that we decide we have $100,000 this year to spend on leadership development with our people. Is this particular going to this leadership summit or this retreat or this, is that going to get us, is that how we want to spend a big portion of that? I've got companies, for example, that one of my clients spends $100 million a year on leadership development.
Wow.
Only on their internal leadership, coaching people. And they grow at about 20% a year. I mean,
it's an investment. It's not an expense if you do it right.
It's not an expense. It's an investment. I remember one time, it wasn't one time, it was over a number of years, and we did it about, Bill Hybels and I would do this pastor's leadership mentoring one night and one day. We'd take them in the evening before and spend all day with them up on Lake Michigan. And we bring in 25 at a time, pastors.
Yeah.
And the first night we would have this dinner, and we'd ask them, go around the table and say, kind of, why are you here? And you would hear, everything from burnout to, I've hit a ceiling, to how do I cope with this growth, is explode, all the issues. Mm-hmm. So what I started doing early on was I gave them all an assessment, a questionnaire, because I wanted to find out what this population of pastors looked like. And there were a lot of things I asked them on that so we could address the issues better. And one of the questions was, where do you go? Do you have a place where you can go that is just dedicated to your growth and your health, and you can be 100% transparent, 100% confidential, where you can really, really unpack it and everything you're dealing with in your leadership? And somewhere between 70 and 80% of those pastors said, I don't have a place like that. The second question on that axis was this: where do you go and what process is there, or whatever it is, that's 100% dedicated to your leadership development, to your getting better? 70 to 80% of them said, I don't have anything like that. Now, the third question was the killer, but here's the reveal, is they said, when I asked them, how many of you would say in the last 2 years you've had something that would qualify as clinical proportions, like burnout or stress, or a problem with somebody on your team, or guess what the number was? 70 to 80%.
There may be a correlation there, you think?
There may be a correlation. And in my work with CEOs, it's just, talk about correlations. The highest performers, the ones that build the most successful things, Christian and business or whatever, the highest performers are the ones that have the biggest time and energy and resources investment in their own development as a leader and the development of their people. And it's always like that. It's always like that. It's always like that. That's all I can say.
Man. That is so good. And just to give a very practical example, because we have small church, it's like I'd love to have $150 million budget. But, Henry, when my wife and I came up to Oro, I came up for $19,000 a year. So that gives you an idea that I'm not exactly, I'm not flying all over the world developing myself. But I heard about this conference that was happening in North Carolina. Our churches were still small at the time, maybe 150 people at this time. So I'm going to say a budget of 100,000, 120,000, like not a ton of money. And we didn't have the money to fly to this event. It was going to cost $4,000 or $5,000. The church, it was the biggest single investment they had ever made in someone's continuing education. I said, I would like to go with my wife. Went to the board. They paid for our entire trip. And we went down there, and it changed the trajectory of my ministry. I mean, that's where all these promptings I had got language around them. James Emery White hosted it. He's been on this podcast before, and turned the world around. That was just $4,000 or $5,000. I mean, now we're a $2 million church, and I don't know where we'd be without that investment. And it was big at the time, but it's that kind of scale. That was maybe 3% of our budget. Changed everything. It was huge.
You are exactly right. It's like if you take Michael Phelps, how many medals did he win? And you say, you could have saved some money on that coach.
Churches think that way, don't they?
Yeah. If you go to the leadership summit, the global leadership summit at Willow, or but they do it really well. In terms of, they will always showcase some stories of some little church or some business person or somebody that was they were producing fruit at some certain level. They came to the summit. They heard this one message that changed everything, and they went back and they took over an entire community because of that little investment one weekend. And Carey, we're not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars or millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. I just want to get rid of that excuse for a second.
I'm glad. One of my missions in life is to get rid of broke thinking in the church. So you just helped a lot with that. Thanks, Henry. I appreciate that. It's just, it's a mindset.
Hang on. Let's go after it. All right. Let's say somebody, their whole budget is $150,000 for the year for the whole church.
Yep.
All right. So here's what we know about how leaders develop. That it's going to take four things. I always talk about four things. Information. You can't do something better or different without learning some principles. Number two, it's going to take relationships. We only get better in the context of somebody that's pushing us, coaching us, moving each other, supporting, modeling things, all that. Number three, I've got to have new experiences that get me kind of like doing new stuff. I got to step out of my comfort zone. I got to go, ride around with somebody and see how they do it. And I've got to go try this. I got to go share my faith on the beach. And I've got to, whatever it is. And then the fourth thing is I've got to structure that path of growth. So let's take the budget. Come on, you got a $150,000 budget. You can take your leadership team, number one, information. You can take your leadership team, and every week you can assign a podcast to them, somebody you like. Every week you can tell them, listen to this podcast, and we're going to, next week, here comes the structure. Next week, we're going to get together for 15 minutes or 30 minutes at a lunch or after our meeting, and we're going to discuss what you learned or what the big principle was in there. And then number three, let's just get a buddy system, and we'll pair up, and over the next week, talk to each other about how you're implementing that, getting the experience implementing that, and then we'll review it. Okay, I just spent no money.
Yep.
But I was a steward of leadership if I'm a pastor doing that.
Right.
Now, money is never the issue. It's never the issue, because it's just like, somebody looks at some celebrity's diet, right? And they get their book and they realize how much it would cost to go buy all this kale and organic. I don't have the money to lose weight. Oh, come on. You can get a buddy. You can go to the park, sort of like the guy said, don't tell me obesity runs in your family. Nobody runs in your family. It's, it's not, it's not about the money. It's about getting new information, putting it into a relational context, getting experiences and trying it and stretching yourself and putting a structure to that. That's free. You can go to the YMCA and do it at a course, a class. So it's not.
That's so good. Well, you know what? While I got you, I've got to talk to you. Probably I've heard so many things that have helped me. I mean, all your boundaries books, and I read Boundaries with Children too late, but it was still helpful in the teen years, Boundaries with Teens, but Necessary Endings. Wow. What a great book. And I remember there's a part in the book where you say you just hate categorizing people and things, but you can't avoid the fact that the world is divided into three kinds of people. Can you walk us through that? Because I think this is another area where we struggle as Christians and leaders sometimes when it comes to necessary endings.
Well, it's one of the biggest issues that leaders, or really one of the biggest issues that people have. Yeah. But especially in leadership. And if you think about the title, Necessary Endings, those two words, it is necessary that certain things have to come to an end in order for me to get to the next level. Right. And the way the Bible talks about this process over and over and over and over is the metaphor of pruning. And pruning, basically for anything to grow, there's got to be some stuff that gets cut away, sometimes even healthy stuff, right? Sometimes sick branches that aren't going to get well, and sometimes just dead stuff that's taking up room. So leaders begin to look at, okay, when I look at my people, and I see some people, there's some people in here that are not performing. Everybody else is carrying their weight. They got to get better. I got to get them to get better. And they start to interact with these people, getting to the three categories. There's three categories of those people that they're going to run into. One group, the Bible calls the wise. Mm-hmm. Wise people are not necessarily the smartest cookie in the room. They're not necessarily the most gifted, the most talented, although they may be. But a wise person basically is defined by this, that when the truth comes to them, when the light comes to them, they adapt themselves to the truth. So you give them feedback and they go, oh, wow, that I do see I'm doing that. I didn't see that before. Thank you for telling me. And they change. They use the feedback. Correct a wise person, Proverbs says, and they'll become wiser still. And so what you do with these people we call wise is that's the people you give feedback, you do a performance review, you tell them, hey, this was great. Why don't you try this and make it better? And they go, oh, that's good, or I'll try that. Or, they listen to feedback and they use it. And so what we do with them is we give them feedback. We talk, we develop them, all of that. So that's wise people. They're good resources of what you give them. Mm-hmm. Group number two, there's some people, you give them feedback, and they don't adapt themselves to the truth. They want to adapt the truth to themselves. And that's called a fool. And so you say, well, this retreat, let's look at how the retreat worked. And, we didn't really get the people there. We thought we were going to get there. And they say, well, that's because, the people that print the bulletin, they. And there's always an externalizing of the problem. It's nothing to do with something they need to do different. You say, you spoke harshly to that person in that meeting. Well, that's because, they're always they. And it says, correct a wise person, they'll become wiser still, but correct a fool and they'll cast insults upon you. It says, don't correct a fool. They'll cast insults upon you. It says, if you correct a wise person, they'll be grateful and thank you. If you correct a fool, they'll hate you for it.
Man.
And so what you get from this second group is something called defensiveness. And you get denial and defensiveness and minimalization and externalization. Basically, I like to say this: the problem is never in the room. You're talking to them, but the problem's never in the room.
It's not their fault, not my fault.
It's not their fault. See, wise people own things, and fools disown things.
Ooh.
And so, what leaders have to realize is you don't deal with these two people the same way, because the wise people are listening and the fools or the mockers are not. And so I love when the Bible says, you know, don't confront a fool lest you incur insults upon yourself. Well, so basically it says, okay, stop talking to him, because you're going to talk. You talked to him for 3 years about this problem. You're going to keep talking. But then it moves to, see, there's great hope for fools. I'm like a fool's champion. I love to work with fools because there's great hope with them. You're just not going to fight that bacterial infection without an antibiotic. It's not going to get better on its own. A fool doesn't need more feedback. They need a different conversation. And the conversation goes like this. How we talked about this problem with getting things in on time or meeting deadlines or, staying under budget or not doing this behavior or not interacting with people like, well, you know what? I don't want to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about that anymore because I want to talk about something different. We're going to change the conversation. I want to talk about the fact that when I talk to you about problems, it doesn't help. And I'm done talking because talking isn't helping. Now, what we need to talk about is that problem. And I need for you to give me a way. How can I make you aware of something where it will make a difference?
Wow.
Tell me how to do that. Is it the way I'm saying it? Is I don't say it often enough? Is it just give me a way where I can make you aware of something and give you feedback or a change that needs to be made where it will actually make a difference. Okay. Now, very few people are going to say, well, you can't tell me anything that's going to make a difference. I mean, nobody's that stupid. Right. So they'll say, well, just tell me about it. Great. Okay. Now we got the method, right? We got the clear expectation. So then we ask the second question. Okay. So we're going to do that. We'll get together every Monday, and kind of see how you're doing on this, or I'll give you the feedback that people give me or whatever, however you measure it. Now, here's my question. If I don't see some changes by this amount of time, or I don't see some activities that are showing you're doing differently by this amount of time, then what shall we do? Right. And don't tell me remind you, because I've been doing that. Okay. So it's going to be a day. I don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be, you're going to go see a coach. Is it going to be a day off without pay? Am I going to remove those responsibilities from you until you're ready for them and give them to somebody else? But basically with fools, you have to have consequences. It's the only thing that makes them begin to want to adapt to the truth. And then the third category is evil. Basically, fools cause a lot of pain, but they're not trying to. They're just trying to avoid responsibility or avoid changing. An addict can wreck a family, but they're not really trying to wreck the family. They're just trying to avoid responsibility. Evil person has destruction in their heart. They want to bring you down. They want to be divisive. They want to cause trouble. They want to advance their agenda. They want to hurt other people, take them down to get ahead. They have an intent. Yeah. And whereas you can really work with categories 1 and 2, the Bible's pretty clear. When you realize that you're in category 3, you go into protection mode because now you're protecting the work. You're protecting the flock. You're protecting the ministry against somebody who's trying to bring it down. Paul says, reject a divisive person after a second warning. I used to read that and I go, well, where's the patience in that? Where's the long suffering? And then when I really, got deep into character study as a psychologist, and you realize that people that are divisive are people that have an intent. I mean, they're trying to divide people. And they're not listening. And the way that they're constructed and glued together is that when you do try to do something with them, they're just going to triangulate it and go to somebody else and make you bad. And it's a cancer. And so
Wow.
now you reject them, you fire them, then it's possible. I mean, evil people turn around, but you don't get them to be better by talking to them or trying to improve them. You protect, you form an immunity to your organization against their divisiveness, and that's usually removal.
So like you, we both have a lot of conversations with church leaders. I would suggest a lot of leaders listening right now, and it's the human condition. And I think like we talked about earlier, faith maybe sometimes gets confusing on this. We got lots of fools and even a few evil people in our mind. We're not very good at addressing them, are we? And if you look at congregational dynamics or staff dynamics, I mean, it tends to be that you spend the majority, if you're not careful, of your time with fools and evil people. Can that easily happen to church leaders? And why do you think that is? And what would you say to leaders who are in that camp where they're like, I feel like all I do is meet with fools? What would you say to them?
It is a great question, and it is a leadership question. And I can tell you, I could name the organizations, people would recognize them, a few Christian organizations just in, let's call it the last 6 months, that this is what they called me about.
Yeah.
And they're, very fruitful, very, very strong ministries. But what they said was, we sit around here at this executive team level, at this leadership team level, and it's like we're dealing with the problem. People it's like, it's just that problem. And so here's the answer. And I say the answer, but this is the 80-20 rule. Look, you're a body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Carey, how many times in the last, hour that we've been talking, how much time have you been focusing on the bacteria on your tongue?
About 0% of the time, honestly.
About 0% of the time. Okay. So God built into the body an immune system.
Right.
That immune system operates at different levels. Okay. The very first one, the brain never even knows about consciously. It's saliva. You take germs in all the time, and way down the organizational chain, it's dealt with immediately. They talk about it. You go to Matthew 18, one person has one person not performing well, sinning against them, or whatever it is. What does it say? They go to them in private and they discuss it. The saliva takes care of it. The brain never even is aware of it. Okay, so at the executive level of ministry, at the leadership level, have you taken your leadership responsibility to build an immune system throughout your organization? So that I had this in my own company just today. Somebody sent me an email. They were so proud of one of their direct reports. They sent me the email trail. Somebody went to somebody else griping about something about, I won't go into the specifics, but just kind of a system or a policy issue, within the company. All right. That person wrote them back and said, look, we don't do that here. We don't gripe about something that leadership is doing or something and gripe to somebody that can't do anything about it. And really, I want you to go talk to your boss about this. And I'm going to copy them on the email because this isn't what we do.
So good.
Okay, that's an immune system. Now, that didn't just happen.
Right.
What we've done is making it a big part of the culture of developing people to be able to have those conversations. And so when you got somebody that comes to the leadership table, they say, just to inform you guys, I've had Susie on this performance kind of standard thing for 6 months because of the way she was treating people, and we finally had to let her go. And everybody knows about it. And okay, so next item. But you have a lot of churches, and that executive team level is going to be dealing with the Susie problem 3 levels down. And Susie's coworkers should have dealt with that before the boss. But in order to do that, you've got to be developing a culture of accountability with each other, of supporting each other, of how do I not live in my silo? How can I come over and help you? And it's about organizational health. So if you find yourself dealing with problem people 80% of the time, you're not leading. You're just not leading. It's sort of like a parent. You got one kid that won't do their homework, and the whole house is oriented around the screaming matches around that one kid. You've lost control.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think there's a lot of churches that would tell you that problem 3 levels down has been the board meeting for 6 months. And it's just a sign of ill health. That's so good. And your stuff has been so, so helpful. I know we're almost out of time. Got to ask you, personal rhythms and practices that keep you healthy. What's 1 or 2 things that kind of keep you pointed in the right direction over time? Because I think health is a habit as much as it is an intention. Just real quick, 1 or 2 things that you're like, man, when I do this, I'm just a lot better than when I don't.
One is that I must every day, just take the small piece of it. I must every day be very, very conscious that I've got some white space in my head to get quiet and there's a lot of stuff that goes into getting quiet, but I really do have to talk to God, and I got to spend some time in listening to what he says in his word. And I've got to spend some time just letting my brain not focus on anything. Now, sometimes that might mean reading something. Sometimes it may mean hitting a bucket of balls, whatever. But it's everything we know. Here's what we know about the highest performers, that they do one thing more than anybody else as a group: sleep.
I love it.
It's true, because just like the greatest weightlifters don't go to the gym and lift the same weight on the same muscle every single day, when you stretch it, it's got to have a rest period where it's able to use that output to make itself stronger. Yeah. And so if you don't find a rhythm every day, and it doesn't have to be the same time, but if you're not measuring every day, I must have the time that replenishes me. That's a big one. And the second one, just like that in priority, is your brain is going to, and your soul, let's just take your brain. It runs on 3 things. It runs on oxygen, so it's good to breathe. It runs on glucose, so you got to eat. But the third thing is it runs on relationship. Mm. And so the rhythms that are very, very important for every area of life is every day and every season and every quarter in different dosages, but every day, am I connected to the right relationships? Do I at least touch base? Am I processing somebody with whoever it is that I'm close to? And there are a few key relationships, I think, that the daily rhythm of I'm in touch with them, that's everything.
Oh, that's so good. And I've become a sleep evangelist. I burned out 11 years ago, and that's one thing I've guarded. And even this past summer, spent a lot of time what I call deep resting, like just even doing more rest than normal. And man, it's unbelievable what that produces in your life. That is so good.
And you just remind, I got to say one more thing about it.
Okay.
And I just thought of it as a thought I had earlier and didn't say it. But because we're talking about investing in rest and investing in replenishment, it's that same word, investment. And you were talking about how people don't invest in their own leadership development and see that as an investment, and that's not selfish, but it's going to cause things to grow, and how you did that, and we took your whole thing to the next level. I was going to give you an example of this. Do you know where Google came from?
No, I don't.
Okay, so Larry Page, founder of Google, one of the two founders of Google, he was a graduate student in Michigan. He decided to invest in his leadership because he wanted to be a leader. He went to a leadership development camp. Okay.
Okay. I didn't know this.
Time away from studies, time away from what he was going to plan, time away from everything he was doing. Went and invested in this leadership camp. One of the things that happened in that leadership camp is they developed and worked hard on changing his thinking in one way. They taught him this sentence and wanted him to apply it over and over and over. And here was the sentence: develop a healthy disregard for the impossible. And so that was his leadership growth mantra. Every day he would say, I've got to disregard the impossible. So he started, because we all do this. We think, how can I grow? How can I get 100 more people at this thing? Or how could they go, well, that's impossible. We don't have the resource. Oh, we can't do that. We don't have the time. Right? So forget impossible. Okay. So he started developing that way of thinking through his leadership development camp. Not maybe, I don't know, a few weeks after that, not long after that, one day he has this thought. What if I downloaded the entire internet and saved all the links? Now, at that time, there were no search engines.
No.
And think of how many thoughts you could have. What our server can't handle that. My phone won't. I don't have enough RAM. I don't even know where to find the link. There's 8 million reasons why you can't do it. But he's going to disregard that it's impossible. Well, today, a 10-year-old can get any information they want about anything in 3 seconds. Because, why? Because he went to work? No, because he went to leadership development.
Wow. Develop a healthy disregard for the impossible. That's
right.
That's incredible. Well, Henry, I know our time's up. You've got a couple of church leader resources I would love for you to tell leaders about that you're coming out with.
Yeah, there's two things I'm really excited about. I get I get calls all the time, like, can you come speak at my church? And there's only so many dates we can do, right? So, but we wanted to be able to have something for that request. And so what we did was, I do speak at a lot of large church events, and we started asking them, so like for example, Gateway, I did a business outreach. They had 500 business leaders from Dallas, or some things at Willow or other places where they have some really good production equipment.
Yeah.
And so what we did was we took 50 of my sermons that I've preached in churches and outreach events or marriage events. We took, I think it's up to 50 now, and we curated them and put them in a library called Church on Demand. And a church can get this, and it's only, I think it's like a couple $100 or something, and you get the whole library. And you can use it in the following ways. I always tell pastors, look, show it or share it or steal it. And what I mean by that is, most churches are having, they're having sermons on the big screen. They're doing one sermon from one location, having 5 other locations as satellites. And so I'll just come into your church and I'll preach on all these topics, or any of these topics, or one of these topics, or whatever. If you need to take a weekend off, just play that sermon. Or you could play it for Saturday outreach or a business outreach or whatever. So it's called Church on Demand.
Okay.
If you go to drcloud.com and just put in Church on Demand, that's one of the resources. The other one is something called Leadership University. And what I did with that is all the stuff we're talking about today and other topics leadership development that I do in organizations and with CEOs and companies and churches or Christian organizations, and same way, I couldn't be everywhere, so I decided, let's take a leadership development path and let's construct a highly interactive digital university where it's built in modules. There's one module each month where they take one of these concepts, and I come in, and it's a highly engaging. We did it like an Anthony Bourdain TV show.
Cool.
It could be on your phone, it could be on your iPad, it could be on the computer, and you watch one concept a month. And then from that, it gives you assignments and interactive things that you can do with your team, with an accountability partner, with your coach, with your boss, with your direct report. And it actually moves you through a process over the course of a year. It's called Leadership University.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, if you go to drcloud.com, it's all on there.
And we'll link to all that in the show notes, including direct links. Henry, I just thank you so much. I've every time I hear from you, every time I listen to one of your talks or read a book, I just feel like I grow so much. And there's something that just really, it's like you kind of know that as a leader, but it just clarifies so much. And often I've learned to do actually the opposite of what I thought I should do from you. So I just want to say a big thank you for decades of pouring into leaders, both in the church and in the business world. And thanks for being a guest today.
Well, I appreciate it. And I'll just say this in closing. I know there's a lot of pastors that listen to your podcast, and what you guys do, the men and women that are out there in the trenches every day and they're shepherding this flock, it is so hard, but it's so important, and you're so appreciated. And just, like Paul said, don't grow weary in doing this work, because it's so, so important. But make sure you focus on yourself. And if you're leading a business, the same thing. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then turn to the seat, and you'll be able to help somebody next to you. If you're not able to breathe anymore, you're not going to be helpful to anybody else. Develop yourself. It's so important.
So true. Henry, thank you.
Okay. Talk to you next time.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Henry. Personally, I hope you enjoyed it as well. By the way, the book that I reference in the message is called Necessary Endings. Anything Henry wrote is frankly fantastic to read. But if you want more, there is a chapter on wise, foolish, and evil people in the book Necessary Endings. And hey, thanks so much for listening. And really, really hope you enjoy the rest of Add, Follow, Block.